Hi everyone, Robin here. In this series of videos, I'll dive deep into the latest updates and features in Final Cut Pro Motion and Compressor. Expect the usual juicy details, tips and tricks, many of which I'm willing to bet you won't see anywhere else. Welcome to this all-in-one video where we'll dive deep into the latest features and improvements in Final Cut Pro Motion and Compressor. If you prefer, you can check out the individual videos in the playlist above or use the chapters to navigate. In this video, we'll cover the enhanced light and color feature for color correction, the machine learning enhanced smooth slow-mo for retiming clips, new search options for finding missing media and effects and more in your timeline, improved effects controls, and an overview of compressor and spatial video. To start off, let's talk about the scrolling timeline. And remember, for all of this, you'll need Final Cut Pro 10.8 or later, and at least macOS Ventura 13.5. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. So I recently made a comprehensive video covering all aspects of the then new and seemingly mundane auto-scrolling timeline when it came out. I even made an addendum to it because I realized I had missed a few things that I thought were important, pointing out certain features that I absolutely loved, as well as aspects that I thought could use some improvement. And while there's a link in the description, as they say, to both, a lot of what I talked about is now more or less obsolete. Thanks, Apple? Yes, actually, it's like someone was taking notes because it has gotten even better since they seem to have addressed every one of my little niggles. So, what has changed? First of all, I said, to activate it, you simply go into the Final Cut settings and under the Playback tab. And here you'll find a new checkbox at the very top of the Playback section for scroll timeline continuously during playback. Well, that is no longer there. But rather, if I close the settings window and look at the top right of my timeline, you'll see a new button next to the skimmer button has appeared. Yes, a button. As I mentioned in the addendum video, some of the comments I got on the first video made me realize my first omission, where some were saying that it's too bad that there's no easy or quick on-off switch. So something others asked for as well. In the same video, I point out that there may not have been a button, but because there is in fact a new freely assignable keyboard command for the scrolling. If you open the command editor with Alt-Command-K and enter scroll in the search field, you'll see the timeline scrolling command listed, which has no shortcut assigned by default. To assign it a shortcut, you simply select it, select or create a custom command configuration, and enter the desired shortcut on your keyboard. And guess what? When I hover my mouse over the button until the tooltip appears, bingo. You can see that even the exact shortcut I suggested is now the default, Alt-Shift-S. And it's probably worth repeating from the other video that you won't have this new shortcut if you're on a custom keyboard layout, as it won't have existed when you originally set it up. The command itself will of course be added, just not any of the new shortcuts. So you can either switch back to the default layout or simply add your own shortcut in the command editor. What else has been changed or improved? Well, for one of the things I thought was less than ideal was the fact that, but what if I want to jump ahead further than the current zoom level can fit into the window? In other words, if I want to scroll to the left past the position of the playhead so it's not visible anymore, well, it starts doing what annoys me so much about the way others have implemented this. It doesn't allow me to scroll to the right any further when the playhead hits the left edge of the window. And how has that changed? Well, you can now scroll freely in either direction without any restrictions while it's active, once again making it that much better than any other scrolling timeline. So while it's playing, I can use my magic mouse to scroll in either direction to maybe check something I just watched or something that is coming up. But as I pointed out in my previous video, if you want to make adjustments without it jumping back to center the playhead, you'll have to have the clip skimmer active and float the mouse over a clip.
Und wie generiert man aktive, emotionale Interaktion zielgerichtet?
Pretty cool. So no one can tell me that Apple isn't listening. And speaking of scrolling in either direction, one of the smaller changes is that while I showed if you hit the J key to play backwards and the playhead reaches the left of the timeline, it auto-scrolls to the right. If you hit J to play backward now, you don't have to wait for the playhead to hit the left side of your timeline. The playhead now stays centered going backward too. One of them little things, but nice. Then there are also some new additions to the only recently introduced dynamic titles and generators themes, as well as a couple of new categories. First off, there's a basic text category that, once again, in my opinion, has some more deceptively simple but very useful additions. Basically, a collection of 3 basic titles, either with or without a background, plus 2 lower third titles. Where in the ones with a background, you have some nice options, for example, to turn the background off or change its color, blur the underlying video, or even dim it during the title. And all of them have the option to add a backplate to the text whose corners can be rounded, its color changed or opacity reduced, as well as several animation options. And almost all of these are also made with a paragraph-type text box that is aligned within the action-safe area of the viewer. That means you can use the simple text title to quickly and easily make some classic burned-in style subtitles, for example. You simply enter the text that you want, set the alignment to the bottom, turn on the backplate, change the appearance to your liking, and you're ready to go. And all of them are, of course, perfectly compatible with vertical formats and conform accordingly. The Dynamic Titles category has gotten an additional set of titles under the theme Deco, which is nice. For which there is, of course, also a new transition that goes with it stylistically. Something I missed with a more recent update concerning the Essential Titles category is that rather elaborate Essential Timecode and Essential Slate titles have been added, both with a lot of useful options for customization. And last but not least, the Dynamic Backgrounds category has gotten 6 new glitch-style backgrounds, which are also pretty cool looking. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, none of which have any color customization options. So again, one would have to either use the Colorize filter or one of the other color filters to push it in a different direction if needed. And once again, all of these are also perfectly compatible with and conform to vertical formats. Okay, so I have a project here with a drone shot that I think is a little too dark, and it also has somewhat of a bluish color cast. To correct this in one fell swoop, I can apply the new machine learning enhanced color adjustments filter. As usual, you have several very easy ways of going about it. Maybe the most obvious would be to go to the filters browser and to the color category and either drag the color adjustments filter from here to the clip, or if the clip is selected, simply double click it. And as usual, it appears in my effects list. I'll undo. You could also just go into the color inspector and select the color adjustments filter from the menu of color correction options at the top, assuming you don't have it set as your default, which will only actually apply it to the clip if I change something. I'll undo. Last but not least, you can go into the Color Correction and Audio Enhancement menu under the viewer and select the new Enhance Light and Color menu item, or hit Control-Option-Command-O. Whereby the notable difference between the three options is that only if I apply it from the menu or via the shortcut, the color adjustment filter is applied and the clip is quickly analyzed, and the new enhanced light and color analysis is activated for all parameters. With any of the other two methods, the enhancement needs to be activated manually. Without it active, the filter behaves just as in previous versions. Each section has a little magic wand button to activate or deactivate the analysis for the entire section. One for light, one for color. Once activated, it uses machine learning to analyze the current frame and automatically optimize the tonal range of the image with the light section, as well as remove any visible color casts with the color section. Making any manual adjustments also automatically deactivates the overall enhancement, as well as the enhancement for whichever section you change. As I mentioned, one thing to keep in mind is the analysis, or rather the resulting settings for the individual parameters, are always determined based on the current image. For example, if I delete it one more time and go to the first frame, again we can see it is a bit dark and also has a slight blue color cast. To help me judge the results better, I can first hit Command 7 to open the scopes. I'll set it to a 2-up with the scope on top for saturation and the RGB parade on the bottom for judging the luminance. In addition to that, for additional visual feedback in the viewer itself, I'll go into the viewer's view menu and towards the bottom to activate the range check for both luma and saturation. Now I'll simply apply the enhanced light and color with Control-Option-Command-O. We see it do a short analysis, and there we go. The image's dynamic range is improved, and the color cast is pretty much neutralized. After applying it, I can make further manual adjustments using the color adjustment effect. For example, I can deactivate the light or color section separately to exclude these parameters from the analysis, or I can adjust the parameters in each section individually. By deactivating the analysis with the little magic wand button for each section individually, I can see the effect of each. Deactivating the light section makes the image darker again. Deactivating the color section brings the blue color cast back. Overall, with both active, I'm at a minimum given a great starting point for further improvements. Looking at the individual values, I can see what the analysis found needed to be improved the most. In the light section, exposure, brightness. In the color section, the highlights warmth is obviously the biggest issue. These also give me a great indicator as to what I need to adjust if I want to improve it in the same direction that much more or less. So if I look at the scopes and think it could use a little more brightening up, I can use the exposure and brightness sliders to push things further to 100% IRE. All the while paying attention to my viewer as well, to be sure I don't overexpose any areas that are indicated by the zebra pattern that appears in the clouds, for example. And if I think it's still too blue, I can adjust the warmth for the highlights or even the midtones and shadows, maybe even the overall saturation, depending on which baseline correction or seasonal look I'm going for. Once I'm happy, I can turn the filter on and off to see its effect. Looks pretty good if you ask me, and again, I think this is a superb tool, especially for people who are not overly versed in the minutiae of color correction. I can imagine many more people can much more easily and quickly get the correction they are looking for. Okay, so now I've corrected the first frame to my liking. But as I said before, both this analysis as well as overall correction only apply to the current frame. So what happens if I skim through the rest of the clip? Only a few seconds later in the clip, I can see by the zebra pattern that appears that the exposure is too high for this portion of the clip as well as later on. Nothing unusual if you're not working with auto exposure. So I basically have two options. I can look for the brightest part of the clip and activate the enhancement for everything, or just for the light section, assuming I like the results, or simply manually re-expose to that frame. Of course, going back to the first frame, I can see that darkens this part of the clip. But if I'm just looking for a general baseline correction for the entire clip, I could leave it at that. But I want consistent exposure across the entire clip, so I'll undo that. Now, to maintain my initial correction, I'll simply set a keyframe at the very first frame at the top of the color inspector, and then skim to the point just before the sky starts overexposing. Here I'll set another keyframe and then skim a little further to where it's even more overexposed. Now I can simply adjust the parameters such as exposure, brightness, and black point to my liking until the zebra pattern from the range check disappears, which automatically creates an additional keyframe. But only for the parameters that I adjust, by the way. I can repeat this for every time I see the zebra pattern sneak back into the image. Once finished, if I skim through the entire clip, I can see that I now have much more consistent exposure levels across the entire clip. I can even watch the parameter values change as I move along the clip. Really nice and very simple. With a consistent baseline correction established, I can now apply additional color correction filters to refine and enhance any specific look I'm aiming for, such as the color wheels, curves, or any of the 12 new presets for color correction filters introduced in version 10.8, which are available for Final Cut on iPad 2, by the way, once again enabling seamless color correction across devices. And by the way, should you not already know, you can set the color adjustments or any of the other 4 color filters for that matter as your default. You simply go into the Final Cut settings with Command comma, and here under the General tab at the bottom, you can choose whatever color correction filter you prefer the most. If I set this to color adjustment and close the settings window, now if I don't already have another color correction filter applied, every time I hit Command 6 to open the color inspector, whichever filter I set as my default is the one that shows up in the window, ready for me to make adjustments. Oh, and not to forget, these same machine learning enhancements are also available in Motion's version of the color adjustments filter. Simply apply it from the Filters menu or Filters library and activate and adjust it just as you would in Final Cut Pro. So Apple gave Final Cut Pro's retiming a huge update with version 10.8 when it comes to the quality of slow motion visuals in particular. While Final Cut has had the option to use an optical flow analysis for retiming clips since day one, Apple has now added an additional machine learning enhanced algorithm. For this, I'll just hit Command R to show the clip's retime editor, and if we look in the pop-up, you'll see that next to the previously available options, slow, fast, normal, and custom, we have a whole new smooth slow-mo submenu. Here, just as with the regular slow category, I can choose from 3 speed presets, 50, 25, and 10%. Mind you, this new method is only available on Apple Silicon, so M1, M2, etc. Macs. So if you have an Intel Mac, you unfortunately won't be able to use this option. And even then, image sizes larger than 1920 by 1080 need to be analyzed and rendered to see the full quality in real time, which is what I always do anyway. Also, image sizes above 4K require a Mac with an M2 chip or newer, and the largest supported image size for analysis is 8K. For comparison purposes, let's start with the regular slow setting of 25%. Obviously, the more you slow down any clip, the more apparent any post-processing will become, no matter the methodology used. But that's actually what we're looking for at this point. The clip, played back without any type of quality selection, looks like this. Basically unusable. So why is that? Well, if we go into the menu for the retiming options under the viewer, for one thing, we can see that we now have the new smooth slow-mo submenu here as well. Going further down in the menu to the video quality submenu, which is only available once a clip has been retimed, and looking in here, we can see that the quality levels have been slightly renamed fast to best with their previous names in parentheses. As we can see, by default, all the regular slow presets still default to the lowest setting floor. This basically does nothing but duplicate frames or round down to the nearest whole frame. Below that, we have the other 3 options as before, where optical flow would usually deliver the best results until now, especially when slowing to a very low percentage, and wasn't actually all that bad depending on the footage. Last in the list, we have the new best setting, which is also optical flow, but it has been enhanced by a new machine learning algorithm. In other words, when you use any of the regular slow presets, the default quality will be fast, and you can switch it to any one of the other now 5 quality settings. If you choose any of the new smooth slow-mo presets, the quality will, by default, always be set to best, the machine learning enhanced algorithm. Just to have a comparison to what we've had until now, let's select optical flow as the quality setting and wait for it to analyze and render, which I'll speed up here. And while it'll usually play back without rendering, you'll generally want to render to make sure you're seeing the final result. I picked this clip amongst others because it's a classic case where there is little contrast between the subjects and background, especially with the girl on the right, with her hair in particular. Generally a recipe for an unsatisfying result with optical flow, since optical flow by itself just follows individual pixels, not actual objects, from frame to frame, basically following their flow across frames. But it'll struggle with bigger changes in brightness or color, so things such as flashing lights, fast camera movements, or object occlusions, which is when one object passes over another. I actually suspect it's only still an option for legacy reasons, meaning so as not to break older projects. After all the analyzing and rendering, if we play the clip back, we can see that the result isn't completely useless. But if we look more closely, then the typical problem areas become obvious. Again, if pixels aren't easily distinguishable as being the same across frames, then it loses track of them or mistakes neighboring pixels as ones from the previous frame and interpolates positions incorrectly, leading to errors in the flow estimates. The man's arm, for example, has heavy temporal artifacts at times because optical flow by itself relies on tracking pixel motion, and when one object occludes another, it has difficulty in accurately estimating the motion of both objects. Possibly because he's out of focus and therefore has poor contrast, which also shows up in areas like his nose. And as he passes behind her, both her hair and his contours are noticeably distorted and sort of meld together. Now to see how the new machine learning compares, I'll simply copy the clip by dragging it with the Option key, select the copy, and now set its quality to the new enhanced optical flow analysis powered by machine learning. So while this too is analyzed by the optical flow algorithm, simply put, the machine learning recognizes and tracks objects within the video. So in principle, the same thing you see with the scene removal mask for masking objects, only in this case for enabling object-specific speed adjustments. Therefore, as we'll see, it's much better at handling things such as the aforementioned issue with occlusions, for example. Once analyzed and rendered, if I play this back and we pay attention to the previous problem areas, we can see, while still not absolutely perfect, I think it's safe to say that the result is exponentially better overall. His arm and nose are fine throughout, and her hair is far less affected by him passing behind her. How much better this object and not purely pixel-oriented retiming is even far more obvious in the case of these two clips of some kids on their scooters and a much more extreme, usually way too extreme speed reduction. In this case, I applied a speed ramp to both to accentuate the jumps and slowed them all the way down to 10%. Something I would normally not even consider doing if not shot accordingly. Again, first without any quality changes, in other words, no intermediate frames. Clearly not something you'd use. In the case of the retime clip using only optical flow, I think one can see why a reduction to 10% would have been unthinkable. The temporal artifacts are massive. Both the foreground and background ramps are distorted over a large area, and the kid on the scooter in the background is the biggest distortion victim. And again, on the crossover between the two during the occlusion, it's the worst. As I said, such a drastic reduction in speed is and was normally unthinkable. Until now, well, let's see how the new machine learning retiming fares in comparison on this second clip that I've already analyzed and rendered. Once again, this extreme speed reduction, not perfect or unnoticeable, but I think it's safe to say that the result is multitudes above that of optical flow by itself. There is very little distortion on the ramp, and the kid in the background is nearly perfect throughout the entire clip. Even as he passes behind the kid in the front, the artifacts are comparatively almost non-existent. So clearly the machine learning analysis ensures far better temporal consistency and generates intermediate frames that maintain the overall flow of motion far better than optical flow on its own. Of course, how good it will look depends on many factors such as content and, of course, level of speed reduction. Oh, and this can also be used when speeding clips up to improve the flow of motion in those cases too. Here are just a couple more tests that I feel really show the significant difference between the two methods. And while again, they're certainly not perfect, I find the results for the running dog, for example, particularly astounding. I'd say the only way to make this any better is to actually shoot at the needed frame rate. By the way, this is also available for another feature in Final Cut Pro that uses optical flow that I have a feeling only very few people even know about, the so-called rate conform. This is an option that becomes active if and when a clip's frame rate differs from the project's frame rate, especially when those frame rates are not even, so not divisible by 2, such as a 30 frames per second clip in a 25 frames per second timeline, or the other way around. Most noticeable in fast linear movements, such as a quick camera pan. You'll often see a rhythmic stuttering, as by default, Final Cut Pro uses the floor quality here by default too, to match the clip's frame rate to the project's frame rate. And since the frame sampling methods have always been the same as for retiming clips, you've had optical flow as an option. And now have the new machine learning here too. As an example, I have this project set to 50 frames per second with a 25 frame per second clip in it. In other words, it only has half the frames per second than that of the project. Selecting it and looking at the bottom of the video inspector, we can see the rate conform setting is therefore active and set to the default, fast, or floor. If I step through the timeline frame by frame with the right arrow key, we see that Final Cut is simply showing each frame twice. Skipping the other options and setting it to optical flow. Stepping through the clip again, we'll see that now intermediate frames have been generated, just as we saw when retiming. And while it looks fine overall on playback, looking at the intermediate frames shows that this is a great example for something that optical flow by itself struggles with that I mentioned earlier. Bigger changes in brightness across frames, in this case the blinking light. Watching the light on top of the car's roll bar as I step through the clip, it appears to be moving back and forth. The roll bar itself also gets quite distorted at times. I suspect it's because it's unable to differentiate it well enough from the trees in the background. Now if I switch the rate conform to best or machine learning and step through the clip as before, we'll see that since the car, roll bar, light and all, is recognized and interpolated by the algorithm as a unit and not just pixels, the intermediate frames that have now been generated are much better and more consistent. The light doesn't move around anymore, and the roll bar is almost completely undistorted through the entire clip. Really nice. This becomes that much more apparent if I retime the clip. After switching it back to optical flow, I can use the retime editor to set it to 25%. Then create a hold frame at the point where the car is close to the camera with Shift-H. Add a speed transition on each end of the hold frame and play it back. Again, the light and roll bar are heavily distorted leading up to and especially during the transition to and from the hold frame. Switching it over to machine learning and playing it again, we see how much more stable and consistent it is, resulting in a far better flow of motion. And maybe you noticed that I never even changed the clip's quality settings as you would expect to have to. Well, that's because once either the retiming or the rate conform has been set to any frame sampling method, these settings go in unison with each other. So changing the rate conform back to normal, for example, also changes the video quality to normal, and the result is also accordingly. So, I don't know how many of you already knew this, but for as long as I can remember, you could already simply enter missing as the search term in your event search field, for example. And any missing media was filtered and listed. After that, you just relinked the media as needed. In fact, you could and still can enter a couple of things such as Audition, Compound, Multicam, or Synchronized. And any of those media types were also filtered whether the search term appeared in the name or not. And that was pretty much it. But maybe you had a fairly complex timeline such as this, and when trying to export it, were told that your project has missing or offline titles, effects, generators, or media. And even if you had disabled a missing effect, etc., so technically you had nothing to worry about, the error would still appear. Or maybe you were wondering what that little exclamation mark on your event is all about, even though you couldn't see any missing media. And while you could do the same in the project timeline by either clicking the index button or simply hitting Command F when the timeline was active to open the index window, and do the same here with missing, compound, etc. Until now, there was little more you could do beyond that. What about missing effects, for example? Well, as of 10.8, the list of searchable criteria has grown considerably. As anyone who has watched my video on Final Cut's duplicate ranges will know, there is a pop-up menu next to the magnifying glass in the index's search field. Clicking on it now reveals not only the ability to filter by duplicate ranges as before, but there are now 5 additional options, which I'd say are all pretty self-explanatory. I can now select missing media to have any missing media in this project listed, or if I select missing effects, I get a list of any clips that have either a missing video or audio effect or both. And as we can see, it even lists any missing transitions you might have, something that until now was even harder to figure out than general effects with complex timelines such as this, since they aren't visible by just looking at the timeline. Selecting video effects or audio effects displays a chronological list of the clips that match those characteristics. Last but not least, my personal favorite, retiming, because I honestly have always been a little annoyed at the fact that there was never an easy way to figure out if and where I had retimed any clips in a project. And even if I knew that I had, I would have to tediously go through the entire timeline or select everything and hit Command R to reveal any retiming I or someone else had done. Something you might also want to know if passing your project over to another app that doesn't understand or recognize retime clips, for example. This full reveal obviously being somewhat messy and inefficient, since even this way I can't be sure that I'm not missing maybe just a small retimed section of a clip somewhere. But now I simply select retiming from the list and all retimed clips are listed. With that, I can either select them individually or even hit Command A to select them all and press Command R to only reveal the retime editor for those clips that have actually been retimed. Super helpful. By the way, you don't even have to choose the desired search criteria from the menu. You can simply enter the term or just part of the term manually if you prefer. Enter retim or retimed clips, or maybe video E for any clips with video effects applied. And if you enter miss, you get all categories of missing. So in this case, both missing media as well as missing effects. That's obviously assuming none of the media names contain any of these search terms. Oh, and not to forget, if you've added metadata such as reel, scene, camera angle, or any such information to media in your timeline, that too can now be searched. Pretty cool and super useful if you ask me. And one last small addition to the search option concerns the event and Smart Collections filtering options. If you hit Command F with the event window active, you, as always, get the filter window where, by default, you can enter a text-based search term. And starting with version 10.8, there are 2 additional search criteria for searching text. Now, next to the inclusion, exclusion, and is not options, we have additional starts with and ends with filters. Okay, so you may have noticed that trackers, for example, have always been renamable, but effects, which of course include color correction filters, haven't. So if you've ever had a bunch of effects, such as a color grading stack like this, there was no way to label them if they were only partial grades, for example, or if maybe one or more effects were attached to a tracker. Well, starting with version 10.8, you can do just that. Until now, if you, for example, double-clicked a color correction's name or clicked on the icon to the right, both would take you to the color inspector so you can make your adjustments. But now, for example, if I have a baseline correction using the new Enhance Color Adjustments filter and another color correction that gives me the look that I want, I can now change the names to reflect that so I can see at a glance what each effect is doing in the shot. And as so often, I can do that in a couple of different ways. Probably the most obvious and easiest is to simply double-click the name in the list, which doesn't switch to the color inspector anymore, but rather highlights the name. Or I can right-click the effect and choose Rename from the menu, or click the menu to the far right of the name and choose Rename here. After doing any of the above, I can simply enter whatever name I want. So I'll name the first baseline correction, then double-click the second one, which is a color mask, to make the sky punchier, and name it Sky Enhance. Then name the last High Con Look. By the way, in the case of a color correction filter, you can do the exact same from within the color inspector window as well. And of course, the same goes for any other effect. For example, I tracked the same pixelation effects onto different people in the scene. Obviously, just for demonstration purposes, since that wouldn't make much sense in the context of a music video such as this. And if you're doing this with a bunch of subjects at the same time, then it's easy to lose track of which is which. You're left with switching each on and off, or in this case, activating their masks to see which is anything but efficient. Especially if you have to come back to it repeatedly to make adjustments. Well, that's no more. Once I've applied the effect, I can simply go back and do as with the color correction filters. After figuring out which is which, I can, for example, name them after whoever they're applied to. Super useful. Okay, so now you've renamed everything, and maybe you want to come back later to take note of every effect you've used after the fact for archiving purposes, for example. Or maybe the effect goes missing for some reason, but now you can't remember exactly which effect it was by just looking at it. Well, to find out the original name, there are again a couple of options. One would be to simply right-click whichever effect you've renamed and select Reset Name. With that, the custom name is reset back to the original name of the effect. But as a little power user tip from me, you don't actually have to reset the name. Because once an effect has been renamed, if you simply float the mouse over it for a second, a help tip appears telling you what the original name was. Pretty damn clever, huh? I think so. And last but not least, you probably know that you can copy effects from one clip to another clip, or clips, by copying it and then either using the paste effects or paste attributes commands. But with paste effects, you can't choose which, should you not want all of them pasted. And paste attributes opens a window where you have to select and deselect whatever you want and don't want. Well, with Final Cut 10.8 or higher, if I, for example, want to copy any of the effects from this clip to this other one because they're practically the same and I want the same color corrections, I can do one of two things. I can select the clip in my Final Cut timeline that has at least one video effect applied to it and open the video inspector. Now, I can select an effect in the inspector by clicking the gray bar at the top of the effect, or select multiple effects by command clicking. And now, simply drag the effect or effects to another clip in the timeline. With that, the effects have been copied. Or, if I undo that, I can also move the playhead over the clip in the timeline that I want to copy my effects to so that it appears in the viewer, make sure the clip that I want to copy from is selected, then drag the effect or effects from the inspector to the viewer. And whatever I dragged over is copied, retaining all the settings of the original effect. Keep in mind that any keyframes the original effect may have had are also copied over. A really great and fast way of copying over an effect or selection of effects from one clip to another with less clicking around. Nice. First off, if you have a clip such as this that I shot on an iPhone, or this one from a Vision Pro, you'll notice that watching them on your Mac or iPhone won't actually look any different than if you had shot it normally or non-spatially. So how is that, and what even is 3D or spatial video? Well, the 3D in 3D video, or in this case the spatial in spatial video, is used interchangeably with stereoscopic, all of which provide an image for the left eye and another very similar image from a slightly different perspective for the right eye. These differences between the left and right images, called parallax, causes you to perceive three-dimensional depth in the video when presented. When shooting spatial video, a single video track for all stereo frames is used to maintain compatibility with regular 2D video production. This technique ensures the video can be decoded by non-3D aware playback systems, allowing it to be viewed in 2D workflows. To deliver these stereo frames, Apple introduced MV-HEVC, an extension of HEVC, where MV stands for multi-view. And by the way, since MV-HEVC is an extension of HEVC, it benefits from hardware acceleration by Apple Silicon. So this is why your spatial video appears normal when viewed in a 2D source. MV-HEVC stores the base 2D view in each compressed frame, but it also records the differences, or delta, between the left and right images, enabling 2D decoders to use the base 2D view, for example, the left eye, while 3D decoders calculate the other view to present both images to the corresponding eyes. This technique is known as 2D plus delta, displaying both the left and right images to the corresponding eyes, such as in a Vision Pro, produces a sense of relative depth. However, additional factors such as the 3 primary zones of stereoscopic depth and various metadata options need to be considered during processing. As a result, developing a comprehensive editing workflow is more complex than it may initially appear. So what can I do with my shiny new spatial videos in Compressor? Well, once opened, I simply drag my spatial video into the batch list area in the lower half of the window, and when selected so it's displayed in the viewer, I can see in the inspector at the top right that it has been recognized correctly as being both 3D, signified by the Vision Pro shaped 3D icon at the top, as well as being MV-HEVC encoded. In addition to that, if I have a spatial video loaded in the viewer and look into the view menu, I now have a new stereoscopic section at the bottom. Here I can choose which of the 2 clips perspectives I want to view, either the default left or the right. Switching back and forth, I can clearly see the slight change in perspective. Now I just need to set up a preset, or rather presets, for the export, one for each eye. The output format can be pretty much anything from movie to image sequence. I'm going to go with movies. And to make sure I'm getting the correct resolution, frame rate, compression, and various other relevant settings, in other words, those of the original, so as not to change anything in that respect, which could degrade the quality of the output, I can use a little pro tip shortcut. I can simply drag the original clip directly into the presets sidebar until I see the custom section highlight. When I release the mouse, we can see Compressor has created a new custom preset called Created From and the name of the original clip. In other words, if I select it and we look at its settings, we'll see that, if unchanged, applying this preset to any given clip in my batch list would set it to export with the exact same properties as the clip it was created from. In this case, HD and HEVC compressed. Cool. So if I only expect to have to transcode videos from an iPhone, I could just leave everything as it is. But since I want this to work just as much for the spatial videos from the Vision Pro that are 2200 by 2200 pixels, I'll set the frame size to automatic. This way, those clips aren't resized. And just to be safe, I'll do the same with the frame rate. Now, if I look halfway down the list of parameters, I can see there is a stereoscopic parameter pop-up menu, something you only get when a spatial video is recognized, and it's set to automatic. If we look inside, we'll see that I have a left eye and right eye option. I'll set it to left eye. Now, back in the presets bar, I'll simply rename this preset to left eye. I'll right-click this preset and select duplicate, or hit Command D. I'll name this one right eye. And with it selected, go into its video parameters and set its stereoscopic settings to right eye. Now all I have to do is press Command to select both and drag them onto my clip in the batch list. I can change the export location if I want and see that the clips will automatically be named left and right eye thanks to the names of my presets. And if I wanted, I could drag this job back to the sidebar to the custom area to create a group containing both presets and name it spatial left/right, for example. Clicking on Start Batch starts my export. That, as we can see, is done in seconds, and the two clips appear next to my original on the desktop. And we could stop there. But to make this whole process even easier, I have a couple of super simple extra credit tips if this, or any other compressor task for that matter, is something you expect to have to do more often in the future. Now that I have a group of my two presets, I can just right-click it and choose Save as Droplet. Save it to the desktop, and now I can just drag my other clip or clips onto the droplet. Check the dialog box that it's using the correct presets and can change the location if I want, and once again, click Start Batch. And again, just seconds later, I get my two clips. My second tip would be the next step up from using a droplet. I have two folders on my desktop, SV, as in spatial video in, and SV out, which could both obviously be wherever on my Mac or even network. Back in Compressor, I'll just go to the Watch Folders tab. To set up a watch folder, I can click at the top right, or even on the icon in the middle, or I can just drag my source folder, so the SV in folder, onto the window. With that, my watch folder is set up, and I just have to drag my spatial left-right preset group onto it. By right-clicking the location folders in the list, I can set those to my SV out folder. The naming convention it shows is unfortunately a little misleading, as we'll see in a moment, and that's it. Lastly, I just have to activate it with either the checkbox next to its name or via the status pop-up on the right. Now, I could simply quit Compressor, but I'll leave it open so we can see what happens and toss some clips into my in folder. And Compressor immediately starts chugging away, and a few minutes later, my split clips show up in my out folder. Super easy. And just to show that it works as expected, here are a few of the pairs of left and right eyes on top of each other, each set to 50% opacity, and we can clearly see the two angles or eyes and the resulting parallax. Superimposing the one eye on top of the other using the difference blend mode shows the parallax all the more clearly and how the views diverge further apart with objects closer to the camera as they do with those further away. Or I can make a 1920 by 2160 project for the iPhone footage and position the clips on top of each other to create an over-under stereoscopic clip if you have a client that needs it for display on certain 3D televisions, for example. Or even a 4400 by 2200 or 3840 by 1080 project, depending on where the footage is coming from to make a side-by-side project. For these, you can make effects presets, as I have here, for either iPhone or Vision Pro, that you can simply and easily drag to the corresponding clip, or select and double-click to apply to position them accordingly. And export your edit. Then, at least as of the making of this video, before any native support in Final Cut Pro and Compressor, you can get the spatial encoder from the App Store, for example, that only costs a meager $2. With it, you can load your clip and, using the full side-by-side setting, convert your video back to the MVHAVC format for 3D playback on a Vision Pro or other 3D-capable viewing device. Or, of course, as we know now, just watch it as any other 2D clip. So there you have it. Everything you need to know about the new features in Final Cut Pro, starting with version 10.8. What's your favorite feature and which do you think will be the most useful to you? Let us know down in the comments. I hope you found this video informative and learned something new. And if you did, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue to create more content like this. Don't forget to check out these other videos where I share more tips and tricks and comprehensive tutorials on everything Final Cut Pro. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.